Hey guys, and welcome back to Hoosier Hardware. Today we're talking about AMD's just announced RX 5500. I'm gonna kind of ignore the 5500M for right now, just mostly because that's more of a mobile-based GPU, and I'm not really all that concerned about that. What I'm really concerned about with is this 5500 and how it's gonna affect the desktop GPU market, what it brings to the table, what it may not bring to the table, and just what you should be looking at if you're thinking about maybe buying this card in the near future when it's actually available on the market. Let's take a look. First off, to catch you up to speed, in case you haven't been up to speed whatsoever on this, AMD just announced an RX 5500, which really, by the way, makes me wonder if there's a 5600 in the works, since we now have a 5500, and then of course the 5700, no 5600 so far, but I would expect that they'll fill that number in later on. But the 5500 is actually going to be competing against Nvidia's GTX 1650, at least based on the slides that were released. That's what it looks like AMD is sort of targeting, and it looks like AMD's card will probably outperform the 1650 in most workloads, at least when we're talking about gaming, to a fair degree in some titles. And based on the comparison there, I would expect AMD to be seeking out that 1650 price point. At least it looks like on paper that's what they're going to do, especially considering what else AMD has in the market already. The big thing here is that AMD is replacing, or at least it looks like they're replacing, the very much aging RX 580s. That'd be 4 and 8 gigabytes, since the 5500 seems to be configurable in 4 or 8 gigabyte increments. At least, again, it looks like that's what is going to be brought to market. And importantly, based on the reference views of this card, it looks like the card itself is going to be a much smaller card. And of course, being on a 7nm process, that should allow it to be much more energy efficient and thereby require less power to be wasted off as heat. At least based on the cooler that again is being provided in the pictures, it looks like AMD is going to be able to roll with a smaller overall footprint because the cooler is not required to be all that huge. Now, of course, we'll have to wait until we see some really firm data when it comes to independent reviews on just how strong the 5500 is, but if AMD is targeting that sort of competition with the 1650, knowing that it's outperforming the 1650 and being able to come in at a small size just like some of those 1650 options, it looks like AMD is probably going to come into the market around that $160, $170, $180 price, and that's purely based on the fact that that's roughly what you can get a 1650 for right now. And also the RX 580s are available for around that $170, $180 price right now. And I cannot imagine AMD releasing a card that's roughly on par with a 580 while charging any more than a 580. Otherwise, you just go out and buy yourself a 580. So from a marketing standpoint, I really can't imagine AMD going anything much over a 580's cost unless we're getting a significant performance bump, which based on some of the numbers I've seen around that AMD's projecting with comparisons to the 480 versus the 5500, I can't imagine that that's going to be the case. So I fully expect pretty much all of these cards to come in at the sub $200 price, and I think a lot of the very budget offerings like the reference designs, and I assume there will be some third-party cooler designs as well, but I expect those reference designs to be right there with the 1650 in pricing and giving us a little bit more performance, which hopefully, fingers crossed for the consumer, the price then of the 1650 also gets drop kicked a little bit because Nvidia hopefully won't be able to keep up quite with the price to performance game with AMD and will be forced to sort of drop prices just a little bit to compete. Again, that may be hopeful thinking, but that's really what I'm hoping for. Now, as far as seeing any major benefit to the end consumer, I don't know that I'm expecting to see a big one on the desktop, although it is still a nice launch that I actually do like quite a bit. But we still have an auxiliary PCIe power connector on these cards, and I don't really, based on it being what looks like an 8-pin connector, it doesn't look like any makers are going to sort of be able to tweak these cards down to completely eliminate that connector altogether. So Nvidia is still going to have the most powerful GPU on the market that does not require a 6 or an 8-pin PCIe connector. So if you're dropping one of these in a pre-built system, that's probably still your best bet. And then the small footprint will allow these cards to fit into some other systems that maybe a full-sized RX 580 wouldn't have fit in. But for the majority of people, I think a normal RX 580 is probably going to work just fine. And the 5500 is really only going to make sense for a small niche of people as the only solution. Now, as a good solution, it will still be a good solution, but saying that the 580 really needed to be replaced by a card with a very similar price point, very similar performance, and very similar power requirements, that's probably not all that needed. And I think that's the major flaw with the 5500 is that it's replacing a card of similar performance with similar power requirements, at least as far as giving us a 6 or an 8-pin PCIe connector. And although it's a little bit smaller, most of those 580s are still somewhat small dual slot solutions, in which case they will fit into most cases. So the 5500 is still a good card, don't get me wrong. It's just that I don't see it as this huge big release that's gonna completely change the market. That's probably not the case. But what it does do is it gives AMD a more modern solution at a smaller process, which hopefully will save some power, which hopefully again makes AMD a little bit more competitive on that low end. And if it's giving us the performance that it looks like it may be, according to AMD's own charts, which huge grain of salt there, but if it's giving us that performance at the pricing of between a 1650 and a current 580s pricing, then yes, it should still be a pretty solid option in that price range. But it's also still replacing a really solid option there. So that is just a little bit about the RX 5500. Hopefully the charts I threw up on the screen did help a little bit with my explanations, and hopefully it gives you a little bit more insight as we learn more and more about these cards. I am really looking forward to seeing some of the reviews that come out with these cards, and it is cheap enough. I may actually try to get my hands on one so I can actually put it through its paces, possibly even put it into a system to sell off at a later time. It'll just be generally an interesting little card, and I do actually like the sort of short footprint. It makes it a lot easier for being put into pre-built systems. But of course, I do want to know what you guys think about this card. Let me know your thoughts in those comments down below. And of course, if you liked the video, give it a like, share, subscribe, and comment. All those things are very helpful to the channel. You can follow me both on Instagram and on Twitter at Hoosier Hardware. And as always, I'll let YouTube queue up a couple more videos from my channel for you to watch. I'm Shane with Hoosier Hardware, and I'll see you guys in the next video.